Hello folks, Why Guy here again. Welcome to my home on this very beautiful spring morning. The name of this video is called The Why Guy Reexamines Eternal Salvation. So do you think you have eternal salvation, folks? Well, you better think again. Boy, I'm sure that tweaked a few folks. You know, there's no such thing. There just isn't. No such thing, folks. At least not in the way you and I and most Christians have been taught. I'll just say it that way. At least I did a clarifier there, okay? Or a disclaimer, however you want to look at it. You know, some will claim that it's biblical because of verses like Hebrews 5:9 that reads, "And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation." I hope you caught that Latin-based version. I hope you caught that. I want to read it again. I'm going to read it like 3 times in this video. Having been made perfect, we're talking about Christ here, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. So he was perfected by our obedience? No, I don't think so. He became, anyway, I'll explain in a minute. You know, this passage can be understood in just so many ways. But first, let's take this Latin-based translation as it's understood by Christendom and take it on the surface, and that is talking about a perfect being, which is Christ, and it continues by implying that all who obey him will be perfected as well, unless you think there's imperfection with salvation, in eternal salvation, or whatever, okay? I'll come back to that in a moment. Okay, then it concludes by stating that Christ is the source of eternal salvation, right? Did I miss anything? I don't think so. First, now let's completely ignore how it reads in the Greek, you know, that some Christians will claim is unnecessary, of course, and expound on this verse by applying carnal thinking, along with doctrines of men, which unfortunately is common practice, sadly, okay? Is this Latin-based verse telling us that we must be obedient to be as perfected as him, and it requires perfection to obtain eternal salvation? I'm going to read it again. And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. Okay, does it mean that? Does it mean that it requires perfection to obtain eternal salvation? Or is eternal salvation conditional upon our obedience? Aha! That's what most people think. Or let's just push grace aside like it didn't exist, okay? Or it's telling us that he is not the perfect source of our salvation without our obedience. I hope you caught that. So what is the source of salvation anyway? Christ? Is he the source? Or our obedience? Which one is it, Christian? Okay? You know, something just not adding up. As usual, the ancient Latins really effed this one up bad. And you'll see why here in a moment. Okay? To make matters even worse, doctrines of men will combine what this verse says, of course in the Latin, ancient Latin verbiage, what this verse says in Hebrews about eternal salvation, and they'll claim it all means it's referring to be eternally saved from hell. See, they'll add that verse with their hell verses, and then they combine them. Because, you know, nowhere in the Bible does it say eternal hell. Anywhere within Scripture. And yet every single Christian on this planet, well, just about every Christian on this planet, believes it in eternal hell. And yet it doesn't exist in Scripture. You see? Gotta think about these kind of things. So, anyway, I implore those who believe in hell, just for this moment, put hell aside and consider what salvation really means in this verse, in context. All right? I now want to approach the whole idea of eternal salvation by using logic as well as the Greek rendering. All right? But first, don't we have to define salvation, since everyone already knows what eternal means, for the most part? Get this. Saved, salvation, safe, etc. All those words combined means deliverance. You can combine all those words and it means deliverance in the Greek. and the context determines what kind of deliverance is needed. Does that make sense? So all these words are based on the Greek word soteria, S-O-T-E-R-I-A. You know, soteria is a word that has several meanings, including healing or health, prosperity, protection, preservation, and basically, in a nutshell, it means wholeness. Okay? So by using the Greek definition of salvation, I've got to ask, do you need to be eternally delivered from something? Since this verse says the source of eternal salvation. So do we need to be eternally? I'll continue. I think you're with me, right? Because aren't we already healthy, prosperous, protected, preserved, and made whole in heaven? And isn't heaven eternal? Are you following me? Augustine was a key figure who promoted changing the Greek word aeonian to the Latin word eternal, or the Latin word that represented eternal. Aeonian is referring to an age, as in a time period that gives us an opportunity to be made healthy, prosperous, protected, preserved, and made whole. Okay, it's not talking about eternity, so that's why it doesn't make sense to say eternal salvation. All right? So when I say opportunity, it does. It actually does require us. It requires our obedience in the whatever present lifetime that age is talking about, the context, when deliverance is needed. Did that make sense? So now let's read the same verse of Hebrews 5:9 in the Greek, in Amplified Greek. And being perfected, being brought to maturity and completion, being finished and brought to the goal, he became a cause of aeonian deliverance. Remember that word aeonian, an age? Not eternal? Okay. Where was I? He became a cause of aeonian deliverance, rescue, wholeness, good health, and restoration to the original state of being which pertains to and has the character of the age, not eternity, safety and healing of, and for all the ages, for all, in all, those habitually giving the ear, paying attention, or humbly and submissively hearing with obedience to him. I hope you caught that. So don't you see why I claim there's no such thing as eternal salvation? Because this verse has absolutely nothing to do with eternal salvation, even though it states in every corrupted Latin translated Bible, eternal salvation. Okay, I hope that made sense. So in conclusion of this video, I encourage all of us, actually, myself included, to study. It says to study, to show yourself approved. And then you submit that approval unto God. That's why the verse says, study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needs not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. 2 Timothy 2:15. So rightly knowing, folks, rightly knowing what salvation means and dividing aeonian from eternal, that is the truth. I challenge anyone to prove this wrong. Look me up on Facebook. I have a private group called the Y Guy Group. I ask 3 questions for you to join, or the admins and myself. And I have a public timeline under the name of John Anthony Jones. I meant to say Jonathan, and I misspelled it. John Anthony Jones. That's public, so you can check me out before even considering joining the Y Guy Group to make sure you're not being sucked into some weird religious cult or something, which you're not. But anyway, thank you for viewing.